My name is Jill Phillips, and I'm the creator of Whose Shoes, a popular approach to co-production. I was named as an HSJ 100 wildcard and want to help give a voice to others, talking about their ideas and experiences. I'll be chatting with people from all sorts of different perspectives, walking in their shoes. If you are interested in the future of healthcare and like to hear what other people think, or perhaps even contribute at some point, Whose Shoes Wildcard is for you. Today I'm delighted to talk to the person who helps bring our Whose Shoes events alive and ensures they have lasting impact. Our combined approach to co-production has been described as magic. It's definitely a case of 1 and 1 equals more than 2. So I wanted to take the opportunity to kick off the new year by talking to my long-term friend and partner in crime, Anna Geyer, Director of New Possibilities, looking back at what we've achieved together and looking forward to what the future might bring. It's always such a fascinating and sometimes unpredictable journey together, not least with everything we've had to change and develop during the pandemic. I'd like to offer huge congratulations to Anna and her team, who are celebrating 20 years of New Possibilities. What a fantastic achievement that is for a micro business. When I first invented the Whose Shoes board game and jumped ship from my day job back in 2008, I never knew that I'd find a partner who would add so much to what I was trying to achieve. Visual recording enables people to hold on to the conversations and ensure they lead to real action and positive change. So let's hear a little bit more about Anna as a person. Welcome, Anna. Can you tell us a bit more about yourself and what's important to you?
I certainly can, Jill. Thank you. I like being your partner in crime. I like the fact that we've been on a journey together. That's really nice. A lovely introduction. So tell me a bit about me. I'm an outdoors person. I love being outdoors and paddleboarding and cold water swimming at any available opportunity. But we're probably supposed to be talking a bit more about me as a person at work. So
it's all part of it, isn't it? Your paddleboarding and putting your mum on the back of the paddleboard. I love it.
And having adventures and not knowing where the journey will take you. So there are parallels. So I'm a visual practitioner is how I would describe myself these days. But like you say, New Possibilities is 20 years old. So we came about offering training and facilitation to staff who are working with people with learning disabilities predominantly. And that is going back to 2001. There was a launch of a white paper called Valuing People. And within that, there was a bit about how do you ensure that people with learning disabilities are respected and valued and are encouraged to lead the lives they want to live outside of institutional care. So that's where we came from. And part and parcel of that was doing visual minuting of their meetings. And it was a way of engaging people and making sure that their voices were heard and gathering different perspectives. So I guess that's what's important to me in the work now. That's carried right through to today. So being able to represent people's voices is what's important to me. And in order to do that, it's that bit of listening and really taking care of making sure that you're representing people's voices in a way that supports them to be heard, but also supports people to be able to take some action as a result of hearing it. So yeah, I think that's how I would describe what's important to me.
And I can't actually think when we very first came together, but that was coinciding with my journey at the time, working for social care within a council, sometimes using New Possibilities as a provider and getting involved in those sort of events. And definitely when I came to move on and create Whose Shoes, it was exactly around that. It was around getting really passionate about personalisation and personalised approaches. And then obviously becoming two small businesses together and creating our story together over, it must be about 10 years now, I think.
I think it must be at least 10 years. And I remember the first time I met you, and it was in BVSC, which is Birmingham Voluntary Service Council. It was a room there. And I think it was Janita that introduced us.
Okay, so Janita was our partnership board lead for learning disabilities at Coventry City Council where I was working. A very passionate, special person.
Yeah, and I think that's what's happened actually, during our journey is about connecting with people who are passionate
Yeah.
about making a difference in various different ways. But you're absolutely right. In your introduction, you talked about the combination of the board game, your board game, which brings people into a room and completely changes the atmosphere and the environment, puts people at ease in order to be able to have some really difficult conversations and really hear what people are experiencing in terms of service delivery, both from a staff perspective and for people that use the services. So that combination of creating that great environment for people to have good conversations, and then for the visual minuting or the visual recording to capture those conversations real time and then feed it back to people is incredibly powerful. There's something that happens, I think, when you spend some time in a room and you have conversations and you know that they've been really good conversations that you've had, but to have that reflected back to you and to see it there as a record so that you can see what's being taken away at the end of that session. One, it leaves people feeling they've been really quite productive because they can't believe that they've just filled a whole 3 meter length of paper.
And produced an avalanche of post-its for you.
Absolutely, an avalanche of post-its to sort through. So there's that bit of productivity. Wow, have we done all of that? And then there's something about being able to identify their own voice. So the number of people that come up and point at the visual that's been created and say, that's what I said. We said this. That's our conversation. So that bit of validation is really important, isn't it, for people, particularly for people who've used services, for them to be able to feel that they've been heard. And I think that's what the visual record does. They can see, it makes it tangible. It makes a physical artifact, really, I think, that they know that they've been heard and they can see it. And then, it then takes on its own life, doesn't it, really?
Yeah, it really does. I mean, I think we talked together about creating the conditions for these conversations. I mean, I suppose, we can be a bit naughty together, can't we, in terms of you must come along, you must have open, honest conversations now because we need it for the CQC. It's not how it works, is it?
Absolutely.
And people can tell if you actually value them. I mean, some of the work we've done, I remember a really early workshop with a domiciliary care provider who had never met their actual clients, a small company who were keen to actually meet the clients, and the work that went on behind the scenes, not just to invite people, but to nurture them, to encourage them, to offer transport, to set it up in conjunction with a little gardening display to make it really fun and enjoyable for people so that they want to be part of it and they feel that their voices are valued. That's an experience, isn't it? I think that's the word I'm looking for, because when you were talking before, Anna, I realised the challenge of our podcast is people say to me, what's Whose Shoes? Well, it's a highly visual, it's an experiential thing, really. And obviously the visual recording, by definition, all the more so. So to try and describe something as an audio is quite a challenge, really. And we say to people to come along to an event and actually experience it in practice, and then they get it.
Yeah, that's right. And so I'm just thinking that maybe in my introduction, I should have said something about what is visual minuting, because there'll be lots of people who won't know that, won't know what a visual practitioner is. So it might be worth me just trying to explain a bit of that for those people that are thinking, well, what on earth is all that about then?
That would be good, yeah.
So as a visual practitioner, I come to events, usually they're engagement events, where people are having conversations, anywhere really where people are having conversations and trying to work out what needs to change is a good forum to have a visual practitioner. And so I work with Carrie Lewis, who's an associate that works with me, and the two of us will pitch up to events and we'll listen to those conversations and capture them in words and images and colour to bring to life the conversations that are taking place. And that all happens on a large sheet of paper that's 3 meters in length. And we start with a blank canvas, and by the end of that session, it'll be full. I'm talking just even an hour and a half to 2 hours, and it will be filled with people's comments and experiences. So that's what my form of visual practice is, predominantly about capturing engagement events. And I think that's the bit that's important to me. It's engagement events that really feed me in terms of being able to do a good job, because it's about representing people's voices.
And I think that's what I love about the way you do the recording. It's so authentic, and to literally start with a blank canvas, because sometimes people have got preset themes that they think you might want to put as huge words on the blank canvas at the beginning. But although they might have, I mean, in the case of the work that we do together, we have scenarios and poems, and it's very much within the design of Whose Shoes that people choose the actual scenarios and poems to some extent that are relevant to what their event is about and what they're hoping to achieve. But it doesn't necessarily mean, and it shouldn't mean, that all the conversations are around those set topics. The conversations need to be around what people need to talk about, and that's the genuine co-production.
That's it, absolutely. And I think that that's fascinating, because you're right, there will be conversations about, so what should the focus of this workshop be? And let's think about the cards that might help those conversations to happen. But what is that when people step into the room, it doesn't matter what the scenarios are. If they have something that they need to tell you, they'll find a way of weaving it into whatever card is turned. If they've got something that they need you to hear, they'll say it, regardless of whether or not it fits into your themed scenarios or not. It's just
Yeah.
the conversations that need to happen.
And that's what we try and describe to the people running the events, that there's no such thing as going off piste, that you don't come back to the scenario and say, oh, hang on a minute, we've gone a bit off track. Let's go back to what we're meant to be talking about. It's not meant to be that sort of approach. It's like you say, pulling out the conversations that need to happen.
That's it. And so that bit of people trying to say, okay, so we're going to have these themes. So it would be really great if we could organise the information around these themes. And I know in my heart of hearts that with the best intentions, we can try and shoehorn them into those themes, but actually other themes might come out, and they're telling you things that are important to people. So it's that voice that kind of comes through. It's the power of that voice that comes through the post-its that I've learned over the years to be much more fluid and relaxed about. Actually, the themes that come out will be the themes that are important to this group at this time around these tables playing this particular game.
And I think that can be a real challenge to people in terms of real co-production, because they might have their pre-written draft strategy that they're hoping to use the Whose Shoes event to try out. But it's far better if they get involved in co-production when they're putting together their strategy and use those conversations to shape what the strategy is going to be.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So I think in terms of when we get involved, I mean, that's the other thing I wanted to reflect on really, Anna, just the different organisations we see, all the different topics, at what stage they're involving us, why they're involving us, how the kind of culture in the room feels, whether people feel able to speak out, whether they're used to speaking all together, different voices, no hierarchy, just people with all the people who either are or should be involved in their topic. It's fascinating.
It is fascinating. And when it comes to events that we do together, that where people have gone the extra mile and are feeling quite nervous about whether or not this is going to be good, that it's usually they've got the right ingredients,
Yes.
because they've put an awful lot of thought and effort and energy into it. And that shines through right from the buzz that's in the room to the messages that come through, and an openness, because sometimes I'm recording some really hard hitting experiences that you can't ignore. Really important that they're captured. And I always find it interesting hearing some of the stories about where some of these big records are displayed. And I know that one CCG who had a copy of a visual minute from one of the Whose Shoes workshops had put it up on the wall outside their office. And it's nice because, there are times when you keep going back to organisations, or like that you say, that partnership. So there might be a hospital that's working with the CCG, that's working with local providers. So there's a real network of partnership in the way they're working. But anyway, this CCG had their poster up on the wall outside the office. And people were stopping and looking at it and wanting to know what it was about. And the one time I went back to this organisation, they said, it's been brilliant because we've been trying to have a conversation with education and children's services for as long as I can remember. But now we've got that record on the wall outside. Somebody from that department was walking along and was interested and asked some questions. And it was the first time we've had a conversation. And I've been trying to have this conversation with them for ages, but this was my opportunity. So there's that kind of impromptu, spontaneous conversations that can come out of an event, but also of the record itself, that it enables people to continue. So you have great conversations in the room, and then they see the record out of context and they're intrigued and they ask questions, and before they know it, they're sucked into having some really deep and meaningful conversations and thinking, oh yeah, we need to do something about that. So there's the breadth of people that you can connect with, but then there's also the breadth of subjects that we talk about. For Whose Shoes, you've got subjects range from dementia care to maternity care to bereavement support to, you know what I mean? It's huge, isn't it?
It is huge.
Spans all sorts of boundaries there.
And then all the common themes that come through, regardless of the topic that we're talking about, because it's all about people and united by vulnerability. And who is it who doesn't want to be listened to? Who is it that doesn't want to feel valued, to feel their voices being heard? And the whole thing around, I never wanted to make a complaint. I just wanted to be listened to, and for my experience to help somebody else so that it doesn't happen, whether it's a big thing or a smaller thing. So many, it is really fascinating what we discover, I think.
That just really wanting to be listened to has just reminded me, just looking back again, and I guess my experience of knowing how powerful visual minuting is. So when I worked in the local authority, we were asked to do some person-centred planning, which involved using visual minuting to record the meetings. And often we were called in when things were getting really difficult. And in one situation, we were called in to work with a family who the case itself was going through a judicial review. And one of the things that the family said to us while we were going through the process was, do you know what? This is the first time we've ever been listened to.
Wow.
In all of our experience, this is the first time people have actually listened to us. And I knew that that wasn't the case because they'd had a stream of social workers in and out of their door. And it needed to be a new social worker, and then there was another social worker. And this family was badged as being really difficult. But I think that it was more that they hadn't actually felt that they had been heard. And it's that bit of being heard and being listened to. The listening is the making meaning of what you've heard. And I think that when people experience having really been listened to, just can help move things forward. If you can just say, yeah, I understand what you've just told me. I've heard what you've told me. This is what I understand, reflecting back to it. And that's what we're doing with a visual minute, isn't it? We're listening very carefully. We're not engaging in a conversation, but we're listening and we're reflecting and making meaning of what it is that is being said, and presenting that back to people to demonstrate that they've been heard and listened to. And I guess it's that bit. It's all that bit of
It is
magic that happens in visual recording.
And I think it's the combination, that feeling works every which way. So combining it back with the Whose Shoes approach for people to understand different perspectives. So that kind of, you can almost see the body language change and that sigh, that relaxation, that you come together as people and you didn't understand that, perhaps the system that people are working in and the fact that the midwives, for example, might not have had a break. Just understanding different people's struggles and then working together. That's the co-production bit, to come up with solutions and then combine with the pledges for people to realise that it's not about what they must do, that actually they can take individual ownership and responsibility.
Yeah, that's right. And I remember one Whose Shoes event where there were some young mums that had come and they were sitting together. They didn't want to separate themselves out. They weren't happy with the experience that they had. And they said at the end of the session, I really didn't feel that I wanted to be here. So there was this group of mums and their babies that were kind of tight together. And you would have expected, if they really didn't want to be there, that they would have come and done their duty and left as soon as the session had finished. But they hung around and they said, "Do you know what? That was just the best experience. You know, I came thinking that I wouldn't have my voice heard and you wouldn't understand. But now I actually understand, hearing what staff have to say. I understand." And you could just feel that the wind had been taken out of their sails a bit. You know, they were just like, "Oh, right, okay, I get it. There's more than one perspective here. And actually, I understand more now why I experienced what I experienced, having listened to somebody else's perspective."
Which you'd never get from something like friends and family, where you just write on a piece of paper and that's it, and it just goes into
Mm.
some kind of box or something, and then you may or may not hear what happened. I was going to say what happened as a result. I think in terms of co-production, the very best people are involving people right the way through the whole process. So in terms of what the event's about, and certainly the people that come back and do repeat Who Shoes events, if you like, which I think Lewisham and Greenwich hold the record. I think, is it 14?
Oh, yeah, I don't know. They've done a huge number of events, definitely.
And Cornwall with their regular annual events, other people perhaps using it a little bit more creatively as a embedded approach to quality improvement. It's quite fascinating how people use the tools,
Yeah.
and then how big an event it has to be. You know, obviously you can have a small group of people around a board game, and you wouldn't necessarily need or realistically be able to always bring Anna down from Birmingham. But then I was thinking, it's funny how thoughts jump around that event that we have with Catherine, with just one copy of the board game in Birmingham, possibly for me one of the most powerful, moving events that we've done.
Mm. Oh, it was incredible, wasn't it? And again, you know, that some such hard-hitting messages. That was about people who were falling through the gap, wasn't it? It was nobody's patience materials
It was,
that you were developing, and
yeah,
hearing people's experience of baby loss and at the different stages throughout pregnancy was a very emotive, isn't it? And you know, there's a worry that people won't want to open up, but actually people really value the opportunity to talk about their experience, particularly around childbirth, because it's a lifelong experience, isn't it? You know, it's something that it stays with you. So actually listening to people's experiences where they may have lost a baby or had a really difficult pregnancy and lost their baby during pregnancy, they're hard subjects to talk about and hard subjects to listen to. And so you have this real sense of responsibility of how do I do this justice? How do I make sure that people's voices are being heard? And if you haven't seen visual minuting and you have an image of words and images and colour, you know, you might think that that has a risk of doing a disservice to people's voices. So it's not about cartooning, or I think very carefully about the way in which I represent things. And I use a lot of speech bubbles and use people's words and use a representation of a person rather than trying to do a caricature. But it feels like it's really important to capture the words that people use themselves to describe something, because there's nothing more powerful. And I think that quite often what happens when you have a huge volume of content, it's quite easy when you're typing up that kind of information to sterilize it
yes,
and group things together and sanitize it,
yeah,
maybe. You know, they're all quite harsh words, aren't they? But there's something about capturing something that's live in the moment, trying to capture the energy and the mood and the emotion that's in the room with that, that is incredibly powerful. And I think I've had people come and ask me write some things into the graphic that if they haven't seen it there, maybe they haven't felt able to write it down on a post-it note, they might have come up to me afterwards and said, "This is my experience." And I've said, "So would you like me to write it using those words?" And they've said, "Yes, that's exactly how I want it to be written."
yeah,
So I know that being a visual practitioner, I'm in a very powerful position because I'm the one holding the pens,
yes,
but I really want to be channeling people's voices. This isn't my voice. I don't change the words. I try and group things together and connect things to give meaning. So that might be about connecting opposites. contradictions in what's being said.
Yes.
Or it might be about giving the balance of two different perspectives. But whatever I'm doing, I'm trying to use their language and also trying to feed in some of the energy through the shapes and the imagery that's used, but never getting graphic about stuff from bereavement, loss, dying, serious violence, drug abuse. I'm not going to be depicting, I don't try and draw
Yes. Yeah.
that represents that. It's much more about the words and the shape of that and some of the energy that goes with that will capture it, rather than trying to imagine what that looks like in someone's head.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think what I find really interesting is how it can uncover things that, say, take a very powerful term, nobody's patient. It was about people falling through the gaps. Well, sometimes the experiences and the way that they're told to us come out in a very negative way. For example, I'm going back to that event in Birmingham again, that perhaps someone had to go back to work and they'd had something like spontaneous abortion or medical abortion, that word written on their discharge note to go back to work, which gives all the wrong impression of their much loved, lost baby. And actually, it was because the doctor had to choose words from a prescriptive form about what the reason for discharge was. Well, who can alter that? And you suddenly get like deeper and deeper into, the doctor wouldn't have wanted to tick that inappropriate box, but that was the only one available. And it just goes kind of like deeper and deeper in terms of, well, who can make these changes to make sure that people's experiences are as good as they can be.
Yeah, and language is just one of those themes that come out time and time again. The language that is used in the medical profession and how alienating that can be for someone who's experiencing services, being described in a particular way, or having had a particular procedure that suggests that it was about their fault or their blame or their choice to have something done to them is incredible, isn't it? And I think that, yeah, if you look back, that's the other thing. I mean, you can look back over these records. They're a snapshot in time, aren't they?
Yeah.
You can look back over them, and guaranteed around maternity experiences, around dementia experiences, around the experience of bereavement, the language will come out. The way in which words are used to engage with people, and the lasting impact that leaves for people is massive.
And I think, on a more positive side, if you like, in terms of the impact that we've made in terms of changing that language, that we get these lemon light bulb moments where someone thinks, well, I didn't mean it to be heard in that way. I never realized that the words that I learned at medical school, don't have to be the words that I use with the patient. Actually, it's a person standing in front of me.
Absolutely. And you get that from the pledges, don't you? All those pledges that come out, and they often say, right, I'm not going to use that language anymore. I'm not going to say you're allowed to do this, or you're not allowed to do that, because that's not I don't have the right to allow you.
Yeah.
And that changes the relationship, doesn't it? So all those kinds of conversations that people have that are around their experience, and often coming back down to the communication and the language, people can do something about that. That's not about resources.
No.
That's about attitudes and behaviours. And I think that that's what people see quite clearly from the records that are produced from a Whose Shoes workshop, that it's so much about behaviour, attitudes, language, communication.
And then in terms of what people can do as a result of it, so it might be a pledge, or it might be something like a team challenge. So Leeds, for example, did a language challenge and had a bit of like a swear box if people were using the words that they decided that. And it's not somebody external telling them what to say. It's their team deciding, we need to do something about this. And it can even lead to clinicians writing poems, because it can indeed, because Fabob's Flow, so Florence Wilcock wrote on a train her poem for our Mind and Body Perinatal Mental Health Project, reassured, because she'd suddenly realised that when she explains things to the women who come in front of her, and oh, actually, that's a problem, but medically that's okay. You know, this is how your body works. And then she writes reassured on her clinical notes. And possibly the woman goes home and says, oh, what the hell was that about? I didn't know what she was talking about. She realized that it's not up to the medical profession to decide I've reassured someone. It's up to that person to decide that, isn't it, really?
Feel reassured, absolutely. And they're not necessarily going to say, here, let me just write in your notes that I feel reassured.
But those things, and then that's such a fantastic resource, and then being able to use that was written up as a proper poem for our Who Shoes resources, to be able to use that then in a future workshop, and then for someone to perhaps read that and have a reaction that then feeds through to your graphic record from that event and makes people think. That's how the cycle of improvement and impact happens, I think.
So there's not only the visual records that are captured at the end of each event, there's what happens to that. So the number of people that I've spoken to, they've said, oh yeah, I've seen your stuff. It's all over Twitter, isn't it? And I know that you're partly responsible for that, Jill.
No, I do tweet quite a lot.
But I also think there's something about people just being able to take a snapshot of something that is relevant for them and being able. So for me, there's something in the value of communicating with a wider audience and finding a way that's kind of dynamic and live and in the moment. And so being able to come up to a record and just take a photo and then tweet that this is what we've been talking about, it works really well for social media, particularly where there's stuff around, you know, whether or not people want to have their photos posted all over social media and whether or not they want their comment with their name by it banded around, you know, that this was something that I want to be able to say, but I want to say it in a safe environment. And it's similar to the scenarios that you write that give people a voice. So you write a scenario on a card that gives people a voice. It says what they're wanting to say, but don't have to own it because it's written on a card. I think the same is true for the visual record, that people can go and take a photo and anonymously say, this is a really important message that came out. It might be their message, but actually they don't need to own it. They can communicate it in a way that gives them anonymity, but allows them to say, this is something that's really important and close to my heart.
Yeah, I think that's an aspect of Who Shoes that a lot of people don't appreciate, really, that all the scenarios are crowdsourced. So they are actually a statement made by a real person in that actual role. And by kind of like starting the conversation with that actual person there, obviously they can't argue the point further, but you're hearing firsthand, really, what they wanted to say. And you can again see people just relaxing. We're having a conversation and perhaps a healthcare professional sitting there and thinking, well, this, you know, what's all this about? This isn't even realistic. It doesn't reflect my reality. And then one of the scenarios pretty much says that. One of my clever friends, so Murray, Professor Murray at the London South Bank University, calls it a non-human actor. So it's as if that person is there, but it's in a safe way with it coming from a board game, and people can perhaps play or get distracted by moving the little shoes or playing with the foam squares and so on. But it's enabling these very, very deep conversations to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the magic, isn't it? We started off talking about this combination of the game and a visual record is just something that I think it takes co-production to a different level.
I think it does.
You know, it's much deeper than gathering some people together and having a conversation and having some people write some notes up and engaging people through a process. It's the whole experience, isn't it, of having open and honest conversations, but also having that then captured live. You walk out of the room and you know what it is that's being taken away from that event.
And I think in terms of us developing our joint virtual offer, one of the reasons that I was initially reluctant was thinking this is about an experience where people come together, there are hugs, there's cake, there's bunting, it's fun. If we're doing a sensitive event, then we'd have set it up very, very carefully, possibly a bereavement midwife or a specialist, you know, whoever it was there to look after people, a space to go outside during the meeting. So I was scared, really, taking the approach online to begin with, but we've ended up doing some incredibly sensitive events. And sometimes Obviously, we've all discovered, all of us through the pandemic, what's possible. But in terms of perhaps couples being able to be there, be part of the event with their camera turned off, without having to go back and physically get themselves to the place where perhaps they had a very hard experience. And I think the way that you've brought your visual offer online, Anna, with your studio lighting and flipping your camera around and so on, has been absolutely extraordinary.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think so. It's interesting, isn't it? Because so I did both an in the room event that was the same subject matter that we did online, so that online offline experience. And I think that the in the room event was probably one of the last events that I did before lockdown and the pandemic. I
It was March 2020, wasn't it? I remember.
think it was actually the last event that I did before lockdown happened. And you're right, there is that experience of being in the room. But that session online, yeah, people experienced it differently. The outcome of it, with the conversations that took place, and like you say, people were having their own experience there. They didn't have to be contributing, but they could be having a conversation off camera, off mic, about their experience and just observing and seeing how that panned out in terms of the session as it ran. But the result in terms of those records, it would be interesting actually to have a look at those two records side by side. I think they were both incredibly impactful in their own ways because
Yes.
they were the conversations that they were having. But we know that the online event has led to some fantastic outcomes for people, don't we?
Yeah.
I think the other in the room event, it might be a bit more difficult to judge that because, like I say, we hit the pandemic, and so that kind of shut things down in terms of trying to move things forward. But I'm sure that there will have things that have come out of that event too.
So, in terms of different events that we've held and what the impact has been, what do you think are the ones that we're most proud of, or just some different examples or some quotes possibly from people?
So I think the most recent one that we've done together stands out, and that's not just because it was the most recent one, but the one for Demelza.
So we were in a new subject area, weren't we? A children's hospice and a face-to-face event after such a long gap during the pandemic.
Yeah, and the whole thought that had gone into how can we bring people in and create a safe environment as well as a relaxed environment to have some really difficult conversations around children's hospice care. So the room was all set out and well spaced. Everybody was wearing masks. Everyone followed the guidance in terms of wearing their masks and in being respectful of their proximity to people and all of that kind of thing. And you think that might have had an impact on how people were going to engage with it. So the reason that it stands out, I think, was obviously it was a very emotive subject to be talking about, and lots of emotion was in the room. I know the person that organised it was feeling really nervous about whether or not she'd done enough. And you always know, like I said earlier, the people that are worrying about have I done enough have gone over, above, and beyond. And they just need to settle back, relax, and trust the process will be fine when they've put that amount of energy into it, because the ingredients are all there, aren't they?
Yeah, all the little touches that she'd thought through and just that energy and that attention to detail. Amazing.
Absolutely amazing. And the conversation started and it was all quite quiet. And I remember her saying to me, "Oh, they're all very quiet. Is it going to be okay?" And I said, "Just give them 10 minutes or so. They just need to settle in. And once they start talking," and there was laughter and there was tears and there was noise and there was energy in there that was just palpable, really, wasn't it?
It really was, yeah. And then I think when they saw your graphic record, and you always report back, and I think this is an incredible skill, Anna, because you've got to switch. I've realised this. You've got to switch from a mindset of with a pen and post-its and recording to suddenly being able to verbalise what you've done and talk through live, the key points that have come through. So I don't know how you felt reporting that back to them, and then the emotion in the room and the reaction and the ownership.
And I think that that's the bit that stood out to me. One of these events that was a standout event was because when it came to that point of feeding back, I felt this wave of emotion kind of hit me. And I was like, I mean, I have to say, I struggled being able to keep my voice together just to, to feed back to the room. But I think everybody who stood at the front and was met with this, and I really think that there was something about the conversations that they had. I was met with this sea of faces of, we've just had really difficult conversations. You've just heard what we've said and you've just fed that back to us. Now we need to get on and do something about this. That kind of energy that was there to make something happen. And people were really appreciative of what they saw recorded on the graphic, and they came and they had conversations with me, and it was great. I feel when that happens, I really feel part of the process with them. And that bit, as I was saying, being a channel for their voice.
Yeah, it's huge. And I felt really emotional managing the pledges, and we get people to, there's never any pressure, hopefully. We never like go around the tables and ask someone from each table to tell us their pledge. It's more, is there anyone who's so passionate about what they want to do that they want to share their pledge? And then you hear the most incredible things. I mean, obviously, we've all got, as leaders of the event, as facilitators, we've got our own feelings and emotions to handle as well, in terms of perhaps any personal experiences.
Mhm.
And it was just so incredibly powerful, and you could feel people wanting to do something. And I think what I've found with Whose Shoes is very often it's the organisations who are already very good, but they're the ones who want to hear from their people. They want to be able to find out extra things that they didn't know that they can improve. And there was that atmosphere there, wasn't there?
Yeah, absolutely.
And in terms of unexpected outcomes, I think one of my absolute favourites was, wasn't there a woman early stages of labour, and she came across, I think it was actually one of Carrie's graphics, and she was so fascinated by looking at that visual record that she said it was acting as pain relief.
So it's actually, I think the story was that it was Carrie's friend.
Oh, was it?
Yeah, it was Carrie's friend who had said to her while she was in labour, early stages of labour, I saw this record, and I think it was one of mine. It might have even been one of the Lewisham hospitals. So she was there and she saw this record on the wall, and she was just completely drawn into reading everything that was on it, that it took her mind off any kind of labour pains that she was experiencing. So obviously, graphic recording reaches the parts that other analgesics can't do.
Clearly. So unexpected outcomes.
Unexpected outcomes, absolutely.
I think one of my other favourites that I quote quite a lot, and the fact that it literally all came from a woman. You know, you think of only healthcare professionals, only senior leaders, people with positional power can make change. So the changes that happened at Liverpool as a direct result of Helen Calvert, a mum who wanted things to improve in various ways, and literally ultimately leading to a successful bid for a new neonatal unit, because they used co-production and they used your images, Anna, to go back. And I remember Joe Minford, the fantastic paediatric surgeon who led the work, saying, we decided to unite behind those graphic records, and that inevitably when things get difficult, you're trying to move forward and people start to argue and say, well, I think this and I think that. She said we'd all agreed that we'd say, well, it's no longer about what you think or what I think, it's about what we said. And they go back and they revisited the graphic records and use that co-production to think through what people had actually said and make it happen.
I know, it's amazing, isn't it? And you just think that's so powerful, isn't it? And what a result, to have that proposal agreed and to have a new neonatal unit built. And what you could see there were the rationale behind the need to have that neonatal unit built where it was about keeping families together. It was about improving communication, because there were two sites that were involved, and so if you were able to remain on one site and receive the right kind of care and support just in one place, stopped that toing and froing. So you could see that the rationale behind the need for that neonatal unit to be built was very much about keeping the mother and baby and family together and staff supported to be able to provide the best kind of care. And if they were using the graphic to keep reminding themselves of the fact that that's because those are the voices that were coming through loud and clear, that's just brilliant, isn't it?
It's huge, yeah. And I think just perhaps to finish, I was thinking of that event that we did for young parents in Birmingham. So again, an innovative event and quite a courageous event around young parents and with a focus on people who've been in care and using your graphic record. And I think at the end of the event, somebody came up to you, was it, and said, and I wrote down the quote at the time, it would have taken 600 meetings to get to the point that we reached today.
Absolutely. And you're just like, isn't that brilliant? And so that's the beauty of the Whose Shoes workshop, bringing people together, because the room was full, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was packed.
The room was full, and they hadn't had that long to organise it, and they didn't have a budget either, did they? But what they made happen in that moment was amazing. And the fact that they've had some feedback immediately from all of the conversations that have been happening in the room through that visual record, that feedback that happens at the end, feeling that, and then making their pledges, to leave feeling so accomplished that you've achieved more than you would do in 600 meetings. That's pretty awesome, isn't it?
So one of our lemon light bulbs, meetings are overrated.
That's it, absolutely.
So hopefully that's given people a snapshot of what we do together, what we get up to. I think if I put into the notes for the episode some links to your website so that people can actually see the graphics and some of the visual stuff that we do, that will explain it a lot better. But hopefully we've whet people's appetite, Anna.
Let's hope so. Yeah, I've really enjoyed talking to you, Jill. It's been great.
And you know, Anna, we haven't really talked about this being a New Year edition and Janus and looking backwards and forwards. I don't think we've looked forwards at all. So perhaps that's another podcast. We'll do that one soon. Part 2.
Let's do that.
Okay, that's brilliant. Thanks, Anna.
Thank you, Jill.
I hope you have enjoyed this episode. If so, please subscribe now to hear more of these fascinating conversations on your favourite podcast platform. And please leave a review. I tweet as Whose Shoes. Thank you for being on this journey with me, and let's hope that together we can make a difference.